G'day guys, Matt Fradd here. Welcome to Pints with Aquinas. Today I sit down with my good friend Father Gregory Pine to discuss Lent. What can you do to make this Lent a fantastic one? Maybe you're the sort of person who likes to take on 3 different things, knowing that by the 3rd week of Lent, 2 of them will be down and you've got 1 remaining. Do you do that? I don't know. I don't. Of course I don't. We're going to give you some great ideas on what to do for Lent, and you're going to find it really interesting. Okay, but here's the deal. We did this over Skype. As you know, Pints with Aquinas, we do 2 video podcasts, 2 audio podcasts. And then I thought, well, why don't I just turn on Skype and record us? So the camera quality won't be as good, but you tell me. I'd love to hear from you below in the comments section if you think this is a good way to go, so that every Pints with Aquinas episode is both a podcast download from iTunes or whatever, but also on YouTube. So you let me know. Seriously, right now. Tell me below. I'm waiting. Also, while you're there, click subscribe and that bell button. That way YouTube will be forced to let you know whenever we put out a new episode. All right, here's my episode with Father Gregory Pine. Do you know that as we're speaking, our episode's going to go live on YouTube?
No way.
Yeah.
Wow.
I think we should record us watching us and then just play that. Imagine how angry people would be.
Yeah, it'd be like mirrors upon mirrors.
How's it going?
I'm doing pretty well, yeah. Living something approaching my best life. How about you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I was at the airport the other day and the bloke who takes the tickets said, "Living the dream." And I thought, that's funny, but I thought, I really am. I love my life. I love my wife and my family and what I'm doing.
That's sweet. I mean, I think I have a more, I don't know what I would call my disposition, but less sunny. So I start with like self-condemnation and then I move from there to an appreciation. So I think my first instinct is to say that my life is a dumpster fire and then move from there like, you know what, it's not the worst dumpster fire, you know?
Interesting. I don't know why that reminds me of kind of Jewish comedy or Jewish humor, the sort of world-weary Larry David type kind of nothing's good, you know.
Have you seen the Coen Brothers movie, A Serious Man?
Oh, I don't know if I have. I probably.
It's maybe like 2013.
Is it good?
It is good, yeah. It's a reflection on Job, and basically everything goes wrong for a guy, and then the movie ends. It's awesome.
I was reading. I've been reading Brother Grimm's fairy tales to my kids over the last couple of weeks.
Okay.
And it's terrific.
Okay.
Some of it is really awful.
Yeah, aren't there like many dismemberings and things like that?
Last night I was reading a story by them. It's called The Robbers, I think. And there was this miller who, as his daughter grew older and he decided he couldn't take care of her, wanted to find a husband. He doesn't know much about him, but he gives her away. She goes to visit him, and there's an old woman in the cellar nodding her head. And she says that him and his friends are all cannibals. Not cannonballs, sorry. That would be weird, although there are some weirder things in Grimm Brothers. Anyway, while they're there and while she's hiding, those 3 men drag a woman in by the hair, get her drunk, cut her into pieces, and eat her. And I'm reading this to my kids. I'm like, it's got to make a turn soon. And it didn't. And the way they got him, we may as well wrap this story up. The way they got him is as they were butchering this woman, her finger falls off on the lady's lap who's hiding. And then she proceeds with the engagement until the wedding. And then at the reception, she recounts a dream she had. And the husband is going pale white, knowing he's been found out. And then she said, and then a finger falls on my lap, and she holds up the finger.
Oh.
Brothers Grimm's fairy tales.
Yeah, man, that's hard hitting.
I was like, all of my horror stories are comedies compared to that. That was...
Yeah. No, the 21st century has not known woe like the Brothers Grimm knew woe, apparently.
Yeah. I don't know. I love it. I think there's something beautiful, not about that story necessarily, that was pretty freaky, but I think there's this kind of, we think that we're really intelligent and woke by kind of dismissing the old fairy tales, but you think they were there for a reason. People read these for hundreds of years. You know? I don't want to dismiss them too quickly. And my kids love them. I mean, that one was an exception. But there were others, and they're all kind of pretty gross, but...
Well, yeah, sometimes I worry, well, you're not an American, but I'm an American. I worry that we've lost the capacity to deal with the difficulty of life because a lot of times we experience things that are hard and we're like, I know what I will do. I will avoid this. But it seems like other cultures are more accustomed to it and more reconciled to the fact that life's hard, and they're just like they're just doing their best. So like when you watch American movies, you're like, wow, things here are like tough for an hour and a half, but then the whatever the director or the screenplay writer, whomever, just kind of got weak at the end. They're like, you know what? Let's just wrap it all up nicely because these Americans, they just can't hack it. Whereas if you watch like Scandinavian film, it's like things start bad, get worse, and it ends in like a bleak landscape of nihilism. And you're like,
man.
you know what? Cheers. What's up?
That's funny. That reminds me of a magnet I saw in a fridge that said, old age isn't so bad when you consider the alternatives. Well, I got to look into that Coen Brother movie now. I'm excited to watch that.
Serious man. It's a real keeper.
Good stuff. Well, speaking of serious things, Lent is approaching.
Nice.
And I was thinking we could take some time to talk about Lent and preparing for Lent and what Aquinas has to say about why we fast and so on.
I am jazzed. I am pumped.
Cool.
I am jumped. I am passed. Never mind. Sorry.
So anyway, I guess what I want to ask you is like, when you were kind of getting serious about your Catholic faith, and I know you were raised Catholic, but you went to Steubenville. When's the first time you remember getting serious about Lent, and what did you, if you don't mind telling us, give up or take on for Lent?
Sure. Let's see. So my family is Catholic and pretty intensely so. And from a young age, we took pilgrimages. My parents had a little Catholic bookshop, and they would take pilgrimages to Medjugorje. And and so we went as a family a few times growing up. I was like maybe 3 the first time, and then 8, and then maybe 13. And part of the like the messages of Medjugorje is to do certain things. So it's like Mass, Scripture, go to confession every month, pray the Rosary, and then fasting. And so there's always a kind of culture of fasting in my family. So my dad especially would just do bread and water on Wednesdays and Fridays. And I remember like looking at that when I was 13, and I was like, wow, that's intense. / I'm playing sports, and if I do that, I'll die. But it was like maybe like 14, 15, where I was like, you know what, I should try to incorporate this to the extent that it's possible. And Lent would be a time during which that was especially true. I thought like, okay, penitential season, let's go, let's do it. I remember I worked at this restaurant when I was like 14 and 15 called Isaac Newton's in Newtown, Pennsylvania, that bustling metropolis. And I remember preparing for cross-country meets the night before. I would like bus on Friday nights until like 11:30 p.m., which is not the best way to prepare for a cross-country meet, which may account for the fact that I stink at cross-country or stunk. And I would always get like the kids meal pasta without anything on it. So I'd just be like eating dry rigatoni and be like, I love Jesus. I love Jesus. So that was my concession. I had a little pasta instead of bread. I was like complex carbohydrates instead of simple. So for me, yeah, it was like 14, 15. And the first thing that I did with any real reflection or intensity was fasting. So.
Yeah, that's really impressive. Wednesdays and Fridays to give up, to just eat bread and water. That's really impressive.
Hey, well, as you know, all motivations are basically impure motivations. So I too thought I was impressive, and I also wanted other people to think I was impressive. So
yeah, I don't think I've ever done something really that difficult. I'm almost ashamed to say, but not too ashamed. Maybe I should be more ashamed. I don't know. This is an excuse. I think some people just have a better disposition toward fasting than others. I have a friend, his name's Danny Ryan, he listens to the show, he's in my men's group. He did Exodus 93 times last year.
Wow, that's 270 days.
Yeah.
That's the vast majority of days.
Yeah, and I think it was because he didn't plan on doing it. He just joined a new men's group with us, and he did it with us, and I'm just thinking, you're nuts. And I said to him, in a nice way, but I said to him, I don't think I'll ever do Exodus 90 again.
Just period. What for you was the most difficult part?
That's a good question.
Cold shower.
It was almost like it was the culmination of all of the things.
Okay.
Over time, just wore me down. So when you're having cold showers, you can't snack, you can't have anything sweet. No
alcohol.
You can't have a drink with your wife at night, and it was a culmination of all of it together that was just really getting me down. But if I did it again, I'd like to do something like a tech fast. I'm actually seriously thinking about doing that. Even this Lent, I'm thinking that might be something that I do.
You've done that before, haven't you? Over the
yeah,
summer?
Yeah, I have. It's been a thing.
Is it good or is it
Yeah.
excruciating?
A couple of years ago, I gave up the internet for August. I made it till about the 22nd of August, and then I think my website got hacked into or something, and so I went online for that, and then I threw in the towel after that. But still, I mean, 22 days, it was pretty impressive. Like, I bought a record player because I didn't have a phone. It was like I saved up for it, and I would play records and drink coffee in the morning. Didn't have a phone. I once went to had to give one speaking engagement somewhere in Georgia, and so I went and got a GPS from Walmart.
Nice.
And returned it the next day. It's their fault. It's their fault. They didn't ask me. If they had have asked me, why are you returning this? I would have said, because I want my money back, and I had planned this all along, but they didn't ask me.
I had no intention of retaining it. I once bought a parakeet and returned it the next day.
Why?
It's because I only needed the parakeet as a stage prop in a play that we were doing for like a formal dance at Steubenville. We used it and then we returned it the next day. We didn't get any money back, but we just wanted it to be taken care of, and we weren't going to do it.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, a couple of things I want to say about kind of Lent in general that I guess, I don't know, I haven't really thought this through, so let's see what happens. I don't like it when people sort of poo-poo other people's fasts, or where they say, this Lent, don't just give up candy. I'm like, why not? Shut up. Who are you? Maybe candy's a difficult thing for them, and good for them for giving that up. What else don't I like? Lots of things. I also think that, as a general rule, we're usually a lot worse than we think we are. And so something I tend to do that I want to get better at is I tend to make these big resolutions and then not stick to them and then feel really bad about myself. So one thing I think is just kind of good advice, generally speaking, is that you be realistic about your resolutions. So you don't want them to be too slight, like maybe just candy. I mean, if you just want to do that, that's great. But I also think you want to, at least for me, I want to be careful not to make them too grandiose, because I know myself. So I want to be consistent. I don't want to be giving them up on Sundays. I mean, you can do what you want. The thing is, you have to obey the church's rules on fasting. But anything in addition to that you impose upon yourself is a self-imposed fast. And what is self-imposed can be relieved or something. You're not sinning, right, by breaking your fast. But so I think I'm going to be kind of consistent in something small. So maybe no alcohol and no YouTube. And even no podcasts. I think those three things I might do, and that might not seem like a big deal, but it's pretty big for me. Like when I travel, I really listen to podcasts as a way to distract myself. Like it's really a way to. I don't like being alone with myself. I don't like sitting down. It is a way of numbing, I've noticed, for me. And I think a lot of people say, well, it's a way I educate myself as well, right? I'm listening to these really good theological podcasts or something, which is true, I'm sure. But for me, I've noticed it's a way to sort of it's entertainment for me. So I think that might be something I'm going to look at giving up.
I think too, like that's a good disposition to approach penitential seasons, because it's not like, you have the ordinary year during which you indulge your every whim, and then you have penitential seasons during which you deny yourself certain good things. It's rather that throughout the course of the year, we're supposed to have a spirit of penance, because penitence is a virtue. If it's a virtue, then it's given at baptism, and that it's something to be cultivated and something that grows up alongside the other virtues. So it's always the case that we are sinners and we need to atone for our sins. And it's always the case that our desires are disordered and we need to, by grace, reorder them in Christ. So what does like a penitential season afford us the opportunity for? Well, it's to intensify the spirit of penitence. And so I think that to approach Lent with the disposition, not that I'm going to add something which I will immediately slough off at the end of Lent, but rather that I'll add something so as to intensify a penitential spirit, and that can kind of maybe reorient my penance come Easter. So yeah, you might like give up alcohol during the course of Lent, but then when you return to drinking alcohol on Easter, it's not like let the bacchanalian revels begin. Let's go. You do that with the hope that it's kind of infused the rule of reason and the law of God more perfectly into your life and your members, so that when you return to drink in Easter, you're able to look at it with a greater spirit of enjoyment and detachment, with just like a kind of more sober sense of what's good for you. I think that's just a decent disposition with which to approach it.
Yeah, that's a good point. what's your opinion on when people sort of giving up certain things for various reasons, right? So they want to get thin because they think they look bad naked, and they'd like to look better naked, and so they say, I'm gonna give up like bread. I'm gonna give up. I'm only gonna eat like keto, right? That's the new thing apparently, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or paleo. What's your opinion on things like that? Should we be fasting with ulterior motives and they can go alongside each other nicely, or should we really be trying to fast for the sake of growing closer to God and that alone?
So I think we shouldn't be scandalized when we do things that aren't entirely pure in their motivation. So it's like, all right, I want to be pure in my motivation. I want to have pure intentions. Let's go, and then you give it a shot and you find that it's not especially pure, or that your intention is somewhat mixed, and you're like, oh man, I am so discouraged by the fact that I am a bum. Would that I were not a bum. And it's like, well, kind of get over it, I suppose, because so we're fallen, right? And that touches everything. That's not to say that we're born bad, but it is to say that all of our desires are somewhat inflamed, or like more impassioned than they were originally intended to be, and they're just a bit disorderly. So we're inclining towards all kinds of goods in a kind of chaotic way. And the whole point of like virtue is to reinstitute or to reintegrate our interior life in such a way that we can desire well and desire, like kind of work towards a pure motivation. But I think that's something that will only be consummated in heaven. So on the one hand, fasting is a good thing. On the other hand, dieting is a good thing. And you don't fast for the purpose of dieting, but you can fast alongside dieting without feeling guilty about it, right? And I think that a helpful way to understand this is to think about different kinds of virtues. So there are acquired virtues and there are infused virtues. And St. Thomas teaches that you can have acquired temperance and you can have infused temperance, and that they can actually coexist side by side. And one of the reasons he thinks that there's a need for these virtues is because they have a different mean. So St. Thomas talks about how virtue's in the mean. So if like you're being courageous, you're not being cowardly on the one hand, but you're also not being rash. When it comes to being temperate, the typical standard for normal acquired temperance is you want to be healthy, right? So you don't want to overindulge, but you don't want to be insensate. And so you go towards the middle, and dieting would be something like that, kind of going towards the middle and looking towards food and drink with an eye towards bodily health. But then when it comes to infused temperance, what's the point of infused temperance? Well, it's to be hungry for the Lord Jesus Christ, right? So it has a more kind of theological dynamism at work in it. So you're not so much thinking about like, all right, I don't want to be too fat and I don't want to be too skinny, or I don't want to overindulge, or I don't want to be insensate. You're kind of thinking like, I want to be like St. Francis, kind of like starved to my crazy bones, but wildly alive for the Lord. And mind you, you're not going to kill yourself. But fasting, which may not be sensible according to one standard of acquired temperance, can actually be very sensible according to a standard of infused temperance. So I think that there are different reasons that go on in our minds and our hearts, and that we sift among them and we try to love the Lord as best we can, as best as he gives us grace to do. But yeah, you can't be thrown for a loop by the fact that we want to be skinnier, we want to have better skin, or we want to whatever you want,
Yeah, well, that's good. That's a nice kind of compassionate response. A couple of years ago when everybody was doing Whole30, if you're familiar with that sort of challenge where you don't eat any grains or sugar, I did that. And I remember thinking that this was kind of spiritually beneficial as well, because every day I had to deny myself many of the things that I wanted and that I would turn to out of boredom or just to make myself feel good. And so it kind of made me aware of how I was doing kind of spiritually during that day.
Yeah, I think that like fasting has a great benefit of actually making us aware of how very often we are sad or lonely or anxious or whatever, because oftentimes we eat and drink for fear of what would happen were we not to eat or drink. Somebody was telling me about an Onion article the other day where it's like clock turns 10:45, man says forget it and eats lunch. I think they may have used another word, but so like there's a point that comes late to mid morning for practically every human being where you're like, I don't know if I'm going to make it to lunch. I just don't know if I'm going to make it. And the way that kind of rises in your mind and heart is as a form of terror. It's like an animal terror. It's not, you don't think like, I could use a few calories right now just to take the edge off so I could work more efficiently. You're just like, I'm going to die. It's not a sensible response. And I think that, the disorder that's at work in our members has a way of just kind of fulminating or fomenting this spirit of chaos or this spirit of freaking out. And by fasting, we take a kind of distance from the goods of the earth, and we say like, hey, you're good, but just like chill out for a second so I can sort out my interior life and just be more recollected. So that when I'm hungry, I'm like, okay, ultimately what I'm hungry for is God. Now, mind you, I'm still hungry for food, but I don't need to freak out about this. Or, when you're like in company with people with whom you're a bit uncomfortable and you're like, I wish I could really just drink right now so I could relax and not worry about how all of the things that I'm saying are being received by those present. But you're like, you know what? Maybe I just need to work on being a better listener, being more attentive, not asserting myself as much or dominating conversation, things like that. So I think fasting has that really beneficial effect of just making you more conscious of the ways in which you ordinarily comport yourself, which may not be healthy.
Yeah. Now, generally, I think when the saints talk about fasting, we're talking about fasting from food. And one of the things we'll do in a moment is take a look at the 3 reasons Aquinas gives to fast, or the benefits of fasting. But to your point, I wonder if today fasting from technology might even be in some ways more beneficial, because whereas maybe in Aquinas' day or even 30 years ago we would turn to food when we were uncomfortable or bored, I think now maybe technology has replaced that. Obviously, we have a greater desire for food than technology. If you starve a man, he's not going to want to go on email. But most of us aren't walking around, who are particularly starving. I think we do turn to technology kind of more than food. We just pull out our phone and scroll down to see if a new email has come in, and we don't even know why we're doing that. So what do you think about that? What do you think about someone who's like, I think this Lent I'm not going to fast from any kind of food that except for meat on Fridays, but I'm going to fast from technology.
Yeah, what you described sounds spot on. It sounds super sensible, because when you think about food and drink, we're talking about those things that are most basic. We're talking about those things that we need in the most fundamental sense. But technology also, it addresses other fundamental needs in the emotional or in the spiritual order. So what do we need? We need to be connected to other human beings, because when we feel especially lonely or when we feel unseen, it can be really isolating. I know that a lot of people like the book, The Moviegoer by Walker Percy. He won a National Book Award for it. But it's a story of a guy who goes to movies, and he has the sense that the actors in the movies are important because they're seen, because people buy tickets and come to movie theaters to see them, whereas he himself feels unimportant because he feels unseen. But then the moral transformation that goes on in his life, and I'm just cribbing this interpretation from a friend, is that he comes to recognize that he's seen by God. So I think technology has a way of making one feel seen or known or loved or heard. And it attends to that basic instinctual desire for community, for communion and friendship. And then also it attends to our desire just to be entertained, because there is nothing so harrowing as your own thoughts, or the recognition that your own thoughts are uninteresting, or that you have no one with whom to share your own thoughts because you've closed yourself off from God. I think like what you were talking about, giving up podcasts, I recently made a similar decision because I found that it was kind of encroaching on the contemplative dimension of my life. Like I wasn't as content just to be in the presence of the Lord. I was starting to think of my life in terms of efficiency.
Yes.
And so I'd be on the metro and I'd be like anxious, because I wasn't like, I'll have to pray a rosary right now or listen to a podcast. But it's like, no, like I'm given to the Lord right now. And I'm given to these people in this car. And if they want to chat, that's great. I'll be delighted. But at the very least, I can think of the Lord Jesus. So yes.
No, that is really important. We do talk a lot these days about efficiency and side hustles and productivity, and we maybe forget that we need to balance that out with contemplation and leisure.
Yeah. Ultimately, like, you should be comfortable in your own skin, and if the thought of an unstructured afternoon is oppressive or perilous for you, it's like, ooh, why is that the case? Or if Sunday keeps getting filled with work for reasons that you can't adequately describe, it's why is that the case? Or if you keep working in the evenings, and that's kind of encroaching on your time with your family or your time with your friends, like, ooh, why is that the case? And so Lent could be a good time to ask those questions more intentionally and deliberately, and to take a little distance from one of those aspects of life which is really efficiency driven.
Yeah. Yeah, and then are you pretty good at like being sort of self-controlled over? You said you made that decision not to listen to podcasts. Are you pretty self-controlled when it comes to that, or do you need to kind of delete that thing from your phone and sort of have an accountability partner with even little small things like this?
Yeah, okay, so this is just, what am I actually doing? For me, I was listening to podcasts at every juncture. So anytime I got in a car, I was listening to a podcast, and every time I exercised, I was listening to a podcast.
Yeah.
And so I didn't make a thoroughgoing rule that I will never listen to podcasts ever again. But I did make the decision not to like listen to podcasts on short car rides. And also, I was finding it difficult to make time to call friends, which is to say I was finding it difficult to be a normal human being, which is always a bad sign. And so, I'm still a little bit in the efficiency hustle because I'm still making use of the time in the car to call friends. So that kind of like allays my anxious mind. But I'm just trying to afford space where I'm just quiet in the car and where I'm quiet, exercising in as much as one can be quiet when he's on a rowing machine. So I didn't delete the app from my phone. I still have it there, and I still listen to podcasts, especially with some TI travel. I do long trips. So, going to Princeton for a conference, and that's 8 hours in the car. Mm-hmm. And if I, like that's a long time. And, I would love to be of the kind of stern temperament and disposition where I could be abandoned to the Lord without kind of fretting. But I just, podcasts are good, and that's a good way to spend the time. So yeah, I think about it in those terms.
How do you think the secular culture views fasting? And because I think it was Fulton Sheen who said whenever the church throws something down, the culture picks it up, whether that be prayer beads, right, or meditation, or a sense of being mindful or minimalistic or fasting even. You're seeing more and more people. I think I remember like 15 years ago beginning to see that Protestants were talking about Lent a lot more and the importance of fasting, whereas I'm not sure if this was a big thing in the evangelical communities prior, I don't know, to a little while back. But does the culture have a view of fasting that we shouldn't too quickly adopt? What's the important difference that you see that we don't want to fall into? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think, so I have some like various thoughts that are a little bit scatterbrained, but then maybe cobble together a theory at the end of it. So you hear fasting in different contexts, one of which is in the weightlifting community, to which I do not pertain because I'm among the skinniest men on earth. But I was talking to a guy who has a podcast named Pat Flynn, and he does a lot of stuff with, I guess they're called kettlebells or something like that. Yep. And so he's really, he's really knowledgeable about it, and he's written a couple books about it. But he also does, philosophy and theology stuff, and he's really passionate about that too. So he's a really, really interesting guy. And he apparently wrote a book on periodic fasting, which I didn't really understand the purpose of which until he explained it a little bit, and then I had another conversation. But sometimes I guess it's good to fast in order to bulk up, right? So you tell your body you're not going to get any food for a while, and then when you do get food, your body just like freaks out, and it's like, let's just store all this up for the winter because I don't know how long it's going to be before I get my next meal.
Is this like intermittent fasting? Is that the same
exactly
thing? Okay.
Exactly, yeah. I think I just used the wrong word. So a similar logic is employed sometimes by runners too, who will quote unquote carbo load, made famous by the Office episode. I think it's at the beginning of season 4.
My nipples are chafing. You remember that? Andy Bernard.
Yeah. I was just pumped that Pam and Jim were together. So yeah, you have to deny yourself food for a while so that when you introduce all these complex carbohydrates, your body gobbles them up, stores them up, and then they, slow release over the course of the next day. So I think that you have this on the one hand, and then I think there's also an appreciation in the secular culture for the fact that our minds can get messed up. So you talk about rewiring your brain or forging new neural pathways. So, and you see a lot of this in like positive psychology and self-help literature. So positive psychology, like Martin Seligman, it focuses on the fact that a lot of psychology was typically taken up with psychoses. So psychology was myopically or like nearsightedly focused on the things that were bad. And so it wanted to start talking about the things that were good. And, it employs some brain science for the purpose of forming healthy habits, and it's big into like gratitude, appreciation, and saying the things about your life that are true so that you can abide in that truth. But part of it too is that you can rewire your brain. So by virtue of what you think, you can actually forge new neural pathways. So there's, okay, blah, blah, blah. Those are
No,
two
it's
instances.
fascinating stuff for sure.
Yeah. But those are two instances in which the secular culture has an appreciation for the purpose of fasting. But I think in all of those instances, fasting doesn't have, so it's just got an embodied dimension, right? So the fasting is for the perfection of the bodily form. But I don't think that the secular culture has any real facility with making the transition from the material to the immaterial, because for the most part, it doesn't really admit the existence of the immaterial. But for us, like the primary purpose for which we fast is so that we get more spiritually hungry, or we get more recollected in our spiritual hunger. Because the fact is that we are hungry for God, but rarely do we acknowledge it. Because there's a different logic at work with material goods and then with spiritual goods. Because with material goods, when you first have them, they're very delightful, right? And they afford you great comfort and distraction. But then if you keep indulging in them, the quality of those enjoyments tends to decline. Whereas with spiritual goods, at first, they're very, very difficult, right? Almost forbidding. Like the first time you try to pray for any extended period, you're like, I am so distracted. I will now make a mental list of all of the tasks that I will perform immediately upon leaving this church. But then as you commit to it, right, as God gives you the grace to come back and come back and come back, you find that it affords great, great, great spiritual delight. And so instead of depreciating, it actually appreciates. But you need to take a critical distance from those material goods in order to acquire the savor of the immaterial goods. And so for us, fasting is always something that's hylomorphic, right? Or that's like both material and immaterial. So we take a kind of a critical stance towards material goods, but with an eye towards affirming immaterial goods. Whereas it seems the secular culture can only really conceive of it in material terms. You intermittently fast so that you can bulk up, or
Right. The payoff is material.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
or is it material, or is it immaterial but under a different name? I could see someone saying becoming, being better able to concentrate, or clearing my mind.
Yeah, they might say that. I don't know what people would say, because I don't know what people say. But yeah, people could certainly put it in those terms, to clear your mind. And you see this with like mindfulness, right, or centering prayer. There are some kind of spiritual dimensions to the culture for which people have an appreciation, but oftentimes those things tend to evacuate your mind, right? They're not centered on something transcendent.
Yeah.
Right? They're kind of about you being present to you.
And the best version you can be. It's still very much about you. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think they end up being egotistical, where like with the sense with Christian fasting is that the purpose for which you live is not so that you can have a svelte body. Right? You like think of St. Francis of Assisi, who when he died, they laid his battered body on the ground outside of the Portiuncula. He was blind at the time from such copious weeping, and his frame was just devastated. His habit at the time was cheesecloth. And, his last words are, "Let us begin, for up until now we have done nothing." I'm not like advocating that we should destroy our bodies, or we should just pine after the feats of medieval saints who are able to do such crazy things. But I think that we would do well to be maybe like a little more hard on our bodies, because the secular culture says pamper it, for sure. So we lose the capacity to endure difficulty. And there's a lot of difficulties in life, and fasting is one of those ways that we're prepared to do so. So,
I get another idea kind of to that point about the fact, to your point about fasting not necessarily being for the body looking better. One of the things you could fast from is strenuous exercise. Like, I'm somebody who goes to CrossFit 3 times a week, right? And like you said about yourself, I wouldn't consider myself in shape. I go there and I'm almost the worst one every time, but it certainly clears my head and I feel a lot better. But it ends up being about 2 hours away from my family. I could see someone making the decision, okay, instead of that, I'm going to sit with my family and I'll go for a run. So you're not kind of being irresponsible. You're still exercising, or even saying, I'm going to eat bread. Like maybe at the end of this fast, you'll be fatter because you weren't as rigid about your paleo or whatever diet that makes life difficult for your family. I could see something like that happening too, where you fast from something that you indulge in that the world congratulates you for, but you could trade in that time to do something more meaningful. And maybe at the end of Lent, you've packed on the pounds a little bit more, but but that could be a good thing too.
Yeah, I think it's certainly worthwhile to entertain those options, just because they break us out of picking something for the good of our bodies and then rationalizing it with a spiritual reason. So there was a Franciscan friar at Steubenville who died just before I got to school, named Father Gus. And I think one Lent he gave up not smoking.
Gave up not smoking.
Yeah.
All right.
So yeah, at Steubenville there were only a few acceptable rebellious things. You get tattoos, you smoke cigarettes, stuff like that. And so like a lot of people smoked, and I guess he just didn't understand why people smoked, or he had no real sympathy for it. So as a way of, casting his lot with the students and in solidarity with them, he gave up not smoking for Lent, which is interesting. I'm not advocating for that.
No, it is interesting for sure. Yeah.
But it breaks up the logic of, pick something that you want to do for you, and then call it something that you want to do for Jesus. Rather, think about crazy just entertain wild options and just see what the Lord Jesus is kind of stirring up in your heart. Maybe just to break up, just to break up a logic that may be somewhat self-deceptive.
Yeah, that's really good. I like that. What do you think about, I think many people choose several things, and then every week they kind of pick it back up, and they're like, well, I've still got those 3 things. It's like, I still got that one thing. I'm still not using the phone on the crapper. That's what I've got left for the rest of these days. So do you think, as we said earlier in the show, it's good to be modest, maybe, or at least we should choose things in accordance with what we think we can actually fulfill, with the grace of God for sure, but we're still working with our fallen and weak human nature. And then I guess the other question would be, we don't want to be bragging about what we're giving up, but sometimes it really helps people to tell others what they're giving up or taking on so that they will be faithful to them. It almost kind of like concretizes it, if that's a word. Yeah. I remember when I was a kid at school, we would write down what we were going to fast from, and then everyone in the school would throw the paper in a fire or something. I forget what kind of weird ritual they came up with. But the point was, it felt like, okay, now it's beginning. It's sort of like the start of a new year where it's like 3, 2, 1. Okay, now I'm not going to eat bad or whatever. Yeah, that was a lot. But I guess like telling other people what you're giving up so that you can be.
So I think as concerns commitments, I think we can only do so many things as we can remember. This is sage counsel from a friend as regards New Year's resolutions. Because this new year, I was like, all right, I'm going to do X, Y, Z. I'm going to do ABC. I'm going to do blah, blah, thus and such. And this person was like, yeah, that might all be good, but you might just want to pick a couple, because if you can't remember them, if you can't keep them before your mind's eye, then it's going to become like a series of tasks at work that you do when you sit down in your cubicle. Like, okay, I need to load up Squarespace and update the website for the day, and I need to check the social media feeds, and I need to respond to all the emails, and I need to do, but it becomes like you're working through a checklist of tasks to be done, when you want to be able to hold all these things in your heart simultaneously because they're part of a relationship. Mm-hmm. So ultimately, the spirit that informs these disciplines is, Lord Jesus, I love you, but I recognize the fact that I love you somewhat imperfectly and somewhat selfishly, and I desire to love you more perfectly and less selfishly by your grace. And it seems that, you've made it known to me that these are ways by which to go about it, and you can kind of hold them all together in one embrace. So I think my general sensibility is that 3 is a good number. I have the same sensibility when it comes to praying to saints. I pray to St. Thomas Aquinas, to St. Dominic, and St. Therese. That's about it. And special things might come up. You might have somebody, suffering from cancer, and you pray to Servant of God, Rose Hawthorne, or St. Peregrine, or you might have somebody who's trying to conceive, and you pray to St. Gerard Magella, or special things might make it the case that you pray to certain saints. But I really only pray to a few, and it's kind of like the same logic with best friends. You have certain best friends with whom you share basically everything, and you can only really have so many of them. So I think that, yes, it's good just to pick a few. 3 is not a dogmatic number. It could be 1, it could be 2, it could be 3, it could be 4 or 5, whatever. But I think that's a good-ish number. And I think it also is good to share it with a couple of friends. So there are certain people before whom you are entirely honest and before whom you do not boast. And you can give them an accurate self-narration of your life because you don't feel like you need to impress them, nor do you feel like you need to be falsely humble because you're worried about them thinking you prideful, blah, 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 all these things. And so you can tell those people, I agreed to give up podcasts, to give up YouTube, and I agreed to, not exercise with the same frequency or different kind of exercise. And the person will be like, cool, all right, do you want me to say anything about that ever, or kind of bring it up with you in conversation? You can be like, No, because I'll feel judged, or yes, because I'm lazy. And you can kind of establish the grounds at that point as to what the accountability looks like. So I think, yeah, I think it's profitable to have those conversations, but I don't think it is profitable to have the conversations with everyone you meet. So you see somebody like toddling along down the street, they're like, how are you? Like, terrible day. Should have never undertaken my technology fast because it's destroying me. I mean, I don't know if you lose all your merit, but certainly there's holy souls in purgatory that would have gotten,
Come
sprung.
on.
Yeah, exactly. Like, bro, come on. Yeah, they might not be entirely pleased. So that's my general sense, I think.
Yeah, I like that. Very good. And then, okay, one more question. Obviously, we've already talked about taking things on instead of giving things up.
Yeah.
But I remember like several years ago hearing people say, you know what? Like it was a new idea. Instead of giving things up, you could take something on. And as soon as I heard someone say that, I'm like, I bet that's not a good idea for a reason I haven't yet conceived. Like whenever people come up with a new idea like that, I'm like, yeah, maybe you should just give something up. Maybe that's what you should do. Again, this might even lend more to the productivity thing, where it's like this desire to do more and to do more, as opposed to remove more so that I can be in more of a contemplative state. Now, obviously, there's nothing wrong taking something on, but any thoughts on that?
I have a couple of thoughts. I think it depends on what type of person you are. In a pastoral ministry class, we were assigned St. Gregory the Great's Pastoral Rule, and I think it's the whole third book. He just goes through different types of people. And he'll say, if you're prideful, do this. But if you're falsely humble, do this. Or if you're insensate, do this. Or if you're overindulgent, do this. Yeah. And so I think what you do is tailored to your temperament. So there are some people, right, who are lazy or who are slothful or slothful, depending on how you pronounce it. So there's some people who look at the divine good and they just get sad because it seems unattainable to them. Or maybe you're a doctoral student in your 5th year of studies and you just keep taking on more and more teaching commitments at the university because the thought of finishing your dissertation is oppressive because it's so lofty and arduous. And so you're just kind of frittering away time doing small tasks. Or say you're a mother of 9 or 10 who is also like you're also a lawyer and you work for the Catholic Association. You've got all these different kinds of things on your plate. I think what you do will just depend on what your life looks like. Some people have the bandwidth to take things on, and some people do not. I think that what we should all kind of have in mind is the relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ and an attempt to intensify it. So to make it more dynamic, to make our kind of to be recollected in our dependence upon the Lord, to be more zealous in our consent to and cooperation with the graces that He gives. So it'll just look different for every life. So if you're just kind of like toddling along or waddling through life, not doing too terribly much, it might be time to commit to 20 minutes of prayer a day. Lent might be the time to commit to 20 minutes of prayer a day. But if you're praying 20 minutes a day and you're a mother of 10 and working as a lawyer, then it may not be time to take on 40 minutes of prayer a day. That might be when you're 65 and all your kids are moved out and you're like, whoa, I live this hyper-productive life and now I have this big hole, an empty nest. What do I do with it? But now might be the time where you, give up podcasts in the car, right? Or you give up alcohol or something like that, So I think that's a long way of saying it.
Yeah, no, that's good. I heard someone say recently that whenever you make a New Year's resolution, because we're not far from the New Year, I think they said something like, you should decide what you will do, like exactly what you will do when you fail, the first time you fail. Okay. And I think that's really good because we have this sort of grand idea, okay, 2020, I'm going to finally do this. And you do a great job for 3 weeks, and then you stumble and crash and burn. And the temptation for all of us is just to throw the towel in. And obviously, our goal with the Great Fast ought to be faithful to the fasts we impose upon ourselves. But it might be good, too, to realize that if you fall, just to keep pressing forward. Yeah.
And that's a good kind of icon of the spiritual life in general. I remember reading Searching for and Maintaining Peace by Jacques Philippe.
Great book. I need to read that again.
It's such a beautiful book. Maybe if you haven't read that, you can read that for Lent. It's only like 100 pages and it's like a pamphlet size. But he says that something about Christian saints, and this is a paraphrase and it won't be as beautiful as what he writes, but he says the saint is not so much the one who doesn't fall as the one who falls, but in getting up is not distressed, right? Who does so with a kind of peace and composure, not because he's smug and self-satisfied and doesn't want other people to think that he's fallen, but because he knows that this is what human beings do. They fall, and the Lord Jesus gives grace whereby to repair the relationship, to mount up on wings of eagles, to walk and not faint, to run and not grow weary. And so you can have a kind of serenity or peace in the fact that God is enough, even if I am not. And I think that, yeah, that Lent should communicate that same logic. It should work that logic into your members. So I think that failure, while it is subjectively satisfying to carry out your resolve with perfection, that might not be the most spiritually fruitful thing for you. Because if you're tempted to a kind of perfectionism, which is actually inimical to your dependence upon God for everything, then maybe it's a time to endeavor something where you know there will be a few failures because of it's already baked into your schedule, or you just know that you're forgetful of these things. That's fine. That's good. So resolve to do it, decide what happens when you fail, and then rely upon the Lord to give you what you need.
Yeah, that's a great point. Maybe before we look at these 3 reasons to fast from Thomas Aquinas, why don't we suggest some things people could do? People are out there; they're not really sure what they could do. I'm just springing this on the 2 of us, but what could maybe be some creative ways that they could fast this Lent, or what are some things maybe that you've heard that you thought, oh, that was a cool idea, or I'm thinking here's a couple of things I would suggest just off the top of my head. One would be you really can make your smartphone a dumb phone. My wife, I made her put in a passcode into my settings somehow so that I can't download apps, and so I deleted the App Store. And the only way to get the App Store again is to have her put that code in. And so then I've got this phone with these apps, and whatever I delete, I can't bring back unless I sit down on the couch with her and have her type the thing in again. My point is, you can do something like that for all of Lent. You might delete everything that could access the internet. Delete your email app off your phone and only check email from your desktop. Delete your podcast app. Delete even blocks, Safari and things like that, just to sort of simplify your life. That could be one way. Something else you could do is like when you get into the car, like putting something as simple. This is really, really, really simple, but like putting your phone in your glove compartment, so you're not tempted just to check it when you're at a stoplight.
That's excellent.
Honestly, for one Lent, I stopped bringing my phone to the bathroom with me. And I know that's embarrassing and sounds silly, but if you're someone who does it all the time, that's actually not as silly maybe as it sounds. But those would be a few options. They all have to do with technology, I guess. But what about you? What are some things you'd suggest?
So one thought is driving the speed limit.
Wow.
Which is kind of infuriating.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it is. That's a good
and depending
one.
on the setting, it might be infuriating to people on the road with you. So you wouldn't want to do that.
Not the fast lane.
Yeah, exactly. So to drive the speed limit, which makes you more recollected in the fact that you should prepare adequately for getting to and from, afford enough time, and do so in a way that's not rushed and anxious. Another one is to show up 5 minutes early for Mass. A lot of people don't find this especially difficult, but to privilege showing up for, if you go to daily Mass, or if you go to Sunday Mass, just to privilege showing up just 5 minutes early and then reading the readings before Mass starts. So over the course of Lent, maybe there are 6-7 Sundays. That's fairly straightforward, not too onerous or burdensome, but it's something very concrete that you can do to be more recollected. And another thing would be unitasking. So if you're accustomed to listen to music or podcasts while driving or while exercising, to give them up, maybe during the weekdays or maybe for the entirety of Lent. And then as Easter rolls around, to do so less frequently. So when you reincorporate it into your life, just to reincorporate it with a kind of suspicion of what might come if you were to be hyper efficient at all times. So and that can apply to when you're walking from point A to point B. Don't check your phone when you're driving from point A to point B. Maybe fewer podcast music, calling people on the telephone, there's stuff like that. But just kind of focus on unitasking with the idea that you're trying to be present to the Lord.
Yeah, I like that a lot. That's really good. All right, let's look at these 3 reasons we fast, or at least the benefits of it. Just for those at home, let's do them real quick, and then we could delve into them if you want. First, in order to bridle the lusts of the flesh. Secondly, we have recourse to fasting in order that the mind may arise more freely to the contemplation of heavenly things. And thirdly, in order to satisfy for sins. Where do you want to start at the top?
Let's do it. Yeah, let's go.
It's funny. I think Aquinas has this unscientific idea that meat somehow leads to sexual thoughts or lust, because he mentions that here a little bit, and then at a different point where he talks about nocturnal emissions, he says that one of the causes of that might be that we ate too much meat. And I don't know if he's like maybe using the language differently to how I am reading it, or if he just...
Yeah, I don't know. My like kind of educated guess based on my own experience is that so St. Thomas would not have eaten meat in his convent. He would have only eaten it if he were sick, right, or if he were especially weak. So there's a monastic tradition of not eating meat, and the purpose of which is to kind of remain sharp. And I think we recognize this too sometimes. Like when you eat meat for lunch, sometimes you feel a little bit slow for the rest of the afternoon. Like you have to take a nap in order to recover. But if you eat a kale salad or drink a naked juice or whatever, just have a bean medley, then you're like rip roaring and ready to go. So I think that meat causes a kind of torpor. That's not to say that it's bad, but I think we recognize this generally. That it's better to have for dinner than it is to have for lunch, because at dinner you're winding down, whereas at lunch you still have the bulk of the day before you. So I think he's trying to make the connection between torpor of soul and then unchastity. So like when you're sad, when you're feeling slow, when you're feeling kind of overwhelmed and just not at the top of your game, you might be more likely to indulge in thoughts or actions that would be unchaste. So that's my kind of, best guess at what he's describing. I mean, he cites some, like gods in the description. Venus is cold when Ceres and Bacchus are not there, from Jerome, I guess. So, I mean, he's clearly doing this in an interpretive spirit that doesn't apply the logic strictly. But I think that there is something to be said for the fact that food, drink, and sexual appetites are bound up together. That's what temperance principally bridles, because those are the things that are most instinctual, because by food and drink we preserve our own individual life, and by sexual intercourse we preserve the life of our species. And so it makes sense that we would have very, very keen inclinations to these things. And so if left unchecked or if left unbridled, they can get unruly and kind of can go a bit crazy. And so as a result of which we restrain our desire for food and drink precisely so as to restrain our desire for sexual intercourse, and then afford a space in the heart for other good things.
I can see how fasting helps with lust, and I can also see how it hurts. And I mean that in legitimate senses.
Yeah.
So if, like I've heard someone say, I think it was Christopher West, if you cannot say no to that next Oreo cookie, how will you learn to say no to the temptation to click on that thing that just popped up or what have you? Mm-hmm. And that's a great point. Like if I'm not disciplined, if I can't say no to smaller pleasures, it's going to be difficult to say no to larger, more enticing pleasures. So I can see that. That makes sense to me. But I also think that if I'm right in thinking that the reason we turn to masturbation or pornography or what have you is to soothe ourselves, to soothe our interior kind of emotional state, and I think that really is a big part or the majority of why we do it, then giving up legitimate pleasures that could then cause agitation, I could see could lead someone to be more tempted. This is why I've always said from the beginning, as great as Exodus 90 is, and I would recommend men do it, if somebody's legitimately like addicted to pornography, right, then giving up healthy soothers like a warm shower or a drink of wine at dinner or a movie in the evening with your wife or something, that could be just sort of not that helpful. I think sometimes if somebody is addicted to, say, pornography, then it would perhaps be better for them to give up those activities that when they engage in them, it leads to acting out. So I've never kind of had a nice meal, including meat, and went, I'm going to go masturbate now. But I could see somebody like cruising social media, and their mind starts shutting off, and they start clicking on people's photos they find attractive, and they start clicking through, and all of a sudden they're on a porn site, right? So I'm like, if somebody's struggling with lust, I could see like give up those activities where you're numbing, and maybe that is things like alcohol, right? In which case that would be a good reason to give that up. But
I think there's a hierarchy of soothers, as it were, or just a hierarchy of remedies for sorrow. So, contemplation of truth and the company of friends are the highest ones. But like St. Thomas in that famous question, he affords for other ones, like weeping or like taking a bath, right? And then there's, the other article in which he describes how wine can be delightful for the soul. So I think that if one's inclination is always to go for base soothers, then that's something that you kind of incorporate into your thoughts and prayers on the matter, because you want to move up the hierarchy. You don't want to think like, okay, anytime I'm tempted, I eat a bunch, because that can end up becoming a destructive tendency as well. But you want it to be more like, if I have these temptations, then I appeal to other good things. But hopefully I appeal to my friends, I appeal to a contemplation of the truth, I go out for a run, I do whatever, because if it's always just the most basic or always the most simple, then it itself can become, you can be addicted to food then. I mean, it's not beyond the realm of possibility.
Right, and so we're not saying, well, you should get to a state where you no longer become agitated, and nor are we saying, well, if you're agitated, you shouldn't seek to soothe, and regulate. I think what we're saying is, as you say, there's this hierarchy of soothers, and the ideal would be, if I feel agitated, like to talk with my wife or talk with a friend or engage in healthy ways of soothing, not kind of isolating and medicating.
Yeah, that's the idea.
Okay, so the second, he says, we fast in order that the mind may arise more freely to the contemplation of heavenly things, and he quotes Daniel 10, where Daniel received a revelation after fasting for 3 weeks. In addition to what you've already said about how, not overindulging in food can keep us more nimble and fresh intellectually, how does fasting help with this?
So I think that, and we talked about this, how lower desires can be really clamorous. They can just be really loud and insistent. But by fasting, you put them in check, and then they learn to assume their proper place within the human organism. And then you're able to be more concentrated or attentive in prayer, in your reception and preparation for the sacraments and things like that. So I think that so Aristotle has this description, I think it's in book 10 of the Nicomachean Ethics, when he's talking about contemplation, and he says that man is more properly divine than he is human in a certain sense, because he can rise to the contemplation of divine things. And Suda Dionysius picks up this principle that he finds in Plato, where he says that in the hierarchy of being, you think there are like rocks and plants and animals and men, and there are angels. At each rank, the particular type of being under consideration, it almost attains to the height of the next higher type of being. So we almost attain to the height of angelic thinking when we have, insights or intuitions that are especially profound and luminous. But in order to be, contemplators of divine things, in order to be almost angelic in our thoughts, we need to assume a kind of critical stance towards the base clamorous desires of the body. That's not to say you're getting out of the body because it's a flesh cage like Plato may have described, right? But it is to say that the body has a logic that can become all-consuming unless it's disciplined. And by fasting, we effectively discipline it. So, we talk about asceticism from the word ascesis, which just means training. It's a kind of training of your body so that it can support the type of activities of mind which are most constitutive of what it means to be a human person with a supernatural destiny, who is called to know and to love, who is made to the image of God, and that in whom that image of God can intensify by knowing and loving with God's own knowledge and love of himself. So it means, if for the mind to arise more freely to the contemplation of heavenly things, it means that the mind has to be kind of turned from its consuming thoughts of earthly things.
But then that's not as easy as it sounds, is it? Because I can give up, lower things, and then I might just become obsessed with those lower things.
That's true.
If I give up alcohol and I'm constantly thinking about how I'm not allowed to drink alcohol, and I think that kind of is how it is in the beginning. It's like that.
I think too. It just depends on how long. So Lent's a good period of time. It's an especially wise period of time because it helps you to work things out of your system. And it just takes time to work things out of your system. I'm sure there are sociological and psychological studies about how long it takes to work something out of your system, and it probably depends on the thing. It's different. Quitting cigarettes and quitting heroin are different things. But at least initially, when you give something up, it's all consuming. I remember there's a friar who gave up coffee for Lent one time, and I was the infirmarian, which is the nurseman. And he called me on Thursday, and he left this hilarious message saying that he was basically at death's door, but not to worry about him because he would make it through. But then he was fine. He was fine maybe 2 days later. He had the expectation of receiving caffeine. He didn't deliver. His body rebelled against that. It was toxic, and then he just moved on. His body just moved on. So I think that there's going to be an upsurge in distractions, in obsession, right? In a kind of preoccupation with the thing, but then it'll gradually dissipate as your body and your mind come to appreciate that this thing's not coming back, right? A new regime is in town, and this regime seems to be intent upon the contemplation of divine things.
All right, very good. And then thirdly, now this can sound sort of Pelagian, I think. In order to satisfy for sins, that's why we should fast.
Yeah.
And then who's this quote from down here? Augustine. He quotes Augustine: "Fasting cleanses the soul, raises the mind." And I mean, that's kind of number 2 there, raises the mind. Subjects one's flesh to the spirit. That's kind of number 1. Renders the heart contrite and humble, scatters the clouds of concupiscence, quenches the fire of lust, kindles the true light of chastity. He's so much more inspiring than Aquinas, just prima facie, don't you think?
He writes beautifully.
Yeah.
He certainly writes beautifully. Makes it harder to read at times because it's more involved, but it's certainly beautiful.
Yeah.
So yeah, when it comes to satisfaction, there's a recognition too that we take on punishment willingly. So you start with the recognition that we sin and that sin merits punishment, and that you can either suffer that punishment unwillingly or you can suffer it willingly. If you suffer it unwillingly, then it's going to take longer for it to kind of work itself out, because what does God want? He wants your heart, right? He doesn't just want your body crushed. In fact, he doesn't give a rip about that. What he wants is your heart, and the punishment is given so that our hearts might be drawn to him more perfectly. But the best way to bring that about is to unite our will to the will of the God who metes out punishment because he loves, right? So whose punishment is underwritten by his mercy. So when we adopt penances voluntarily, there's a recognition that I have contributed to the sin in the world. I myself have crucified the Lord Jesus, and I have to atone for that. And that punishment will either be meted out, in God's sweet timing, or I can endeavor it now by his grace. So when you take it on, your heart is being turned towards the Lord more perfectly. You're atoning for those sins. You're working out the temporal punishment associated with them. And you're beginning to live purgatory on earth so that you can rise more promptly to the vision of God in heaven when it comes time. So, yeah.
What was that movie with Robert De Niro? Was it called The Mission?
Yeah.
Was that what it was called?
Yep.
And he was repenting for having killed Native Americans, or maybe it wasn't Native Americans because maybe it was in Southern America, I forget. The reason I bring it up, though, is there's that beautiful moment where he carries all of those shields in a net, which he's dragging to the top of a mountain.
Yeah.
And I just thought, if you were to say to that character, do you think this is what's forgiving your sins? He would have very clearly said, no, it's Christ who does. But that doesn't mean that I can't feel it by putting upon myself these penances. And it almost would have been a real tragedy if someone had said, you don't need to carry that to the top of the mountain because Jesus has already forgiven you. It's like, well, that's true, but you need to make it concrete in your own life that makes sense, right?
Yeah. And when we apologize to somebody, while it can be less uncomfortable if they were to say like, oh, it's nothing, no big deal, it doesn't matter. We kind of want to be forgiven. We want to hear somebody say, I forgive you. Right? Or apology accepted. And then we want to be able to perform some act for them that shows that we mean it, right? And that we have atoned for the thing, and that it won't happen again because this new logic of love has been written into our bodies by virtue of the fact that we've undertaken a penance. So, yeah, I did this thing to you. I'm sorry. I did not intend to do it, but I sinned and I did do it, and I never want to do it again. And so in order to make it up to you, I want to do this thing. I want to undertake this task, or I want to perform this service. And that's just that there's something about that that's just, it's not just like psychologically satisfying. It's metaphysically satisfying. Like you feel it in the soles of your feet, from the soles of your feet to the top of your head. Like I have been reconciled, and things are better now because I am at peace with, in concord with this other human being whom I offended.
Right, and then as we wrap up here, let's just point out for the folks in the back that Sundays are absolutely 100% part of Lent. It's not like the church's calendar switches on Sundays. These are Sundays within Lent, and you add or correct whatever you think needs to be added or corrected. But my advice would be, Sundays are part of Lent, so don't say things like, Sundays aren't part of Lent, so you don't need to fast. But also recognize that whatever you impose upon yourself, you can relieve from yourself without sinning. And so, sure, if you want to not fast on Sundays, that's your decision. You can also not fast on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays if you want, from that personal thing you've imposed upon yourself. But it might be cooler just to decide to give it up for the whole of Lent.
Yeah, I think sometimes people don't count Sundays as Lent because when you add up the days, the math doesn't quite work out. And it's like, wait, what's Lent? What's not Lent? Does the Triduum count? Do Sundays count? But the enumeration of the days of Lent historically for the past 2,000 years has always been a little bit fuzzy. So it's like 40-ish days, and the church has kind of just thrown up her hands and said like meh. So, yeah, so I think it is good to perdure through Sundays. But I mean, if your family or if your church or if your kind of local expression has the practice of relieving some of the stricture on Sundays, is it going to kill you? Obviously, for the reasons that Matt said, no. But I think it's good to do something that draws you to the Lord, and why would you be less drawn to the Lord on a Sunday?
Fantastic. Well, this has been really terrific. I think folks are going to find it really helpful. So thanks for all of your advice, and cheers. Tell us quickly. Let's do a plug for Godsplaining and the Thomistic Institute.
Attaway. Well, let's see. So Thomistic Institute, Hustle and Flow, Aquinas 101 is moving and grooving. We're about halfway through the course, and videos continue to come out, so you can check those out at Aquinas101.com or on YouTube. Godsplaining is a podcast of the Dominican Friars, and that is, I usually say that like the register for the Thomistic Institute podcast is like up here, and then Pints with Aquinas is just a little below, and then Godsplaining is like way below that. So the conversations are just kind of 30 minutes of hilarity once a week about all things Catholic. And so you'll hear about, maybe philosophy, theology, arts, literature, culture, just kind of everyday things. For Lent, we're doing back to basics. So just talking about confession, mass, friendship, penance, the different kind of basic things for our Christian observance that we want to intensify during the season of Lent. And that's the skinny. That's what's up.
All right. Well, thanks very much, and chat with you next time.
All right. Cheers. Until then.